Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1116 just came out, and even though this chapter continued Vegapunk's speech, it was a little bit different from the last few chapters that we've gotten. So far, Vegapunk's speech has been a bunch of bombshells one after another, starting with the fact that the world is soon going to sink under the sea, the reveals about Joy Boy and the Ancient Kingdom, and how the true world of One Piece is actually buried 200 meters under the sea. So we've been getting a lot of major reveals chapter after chapter. This was the first chapter where we, the reader, didn't get any new major information. Rather, this chapter was entirely about spelling out things for the rest of the world. So for the reader, we're all aware of pretty much everything that's explained in this chapter. It's the rest of the world that's finding out about the Lulusia Kingdom incident, and that the Roger Pirates actually knew the truth of the world, and that Vegapunk was responsible for creating the Mother Flame that fueled the ancient weapons. So this was the first chapter after a significant run of chapters where we did not end with some major bombshell reveal. And I think that that's okay, because at this point we're wrapping up probably the majority of the information that Oda really wants to share through Vegapunk with the reader. Because remember, the true history, we're not going to get it all in one place, and certainly not at Egghead Island. The rest of the true history is being saved, likely part of it at Elbaf, but the majority of it most likely is being saved for Laugh Tale. So Robin ultimately has to be the one to uncover the majority of what actually happened in the Void Century. Vegapunk's role was to hit us with some major reveals that set the stakes for the rest of the story. The fact that the world is going to sink under the sea, as long as Imu keeps firing this ancient weapon. Imu is likely going to get access to more of the Mother Flame in the future, and the rest of the world is buried under the sea right now, which pre-frames us for the idea of what the One Piece will likely be related to in the future, which is likely to some degree going to be about draining the waters from the ocean, as I've talked about in previous videos. So while initially I didn't really like the fact that Vegapunk was giving out so much information, at least the prospect of it, because I always felt that Robin was going to be the one that really hit us with the majority of the reveals about the world, it makes sense that it has to be this way, and I think it's very effective for the story, because there does need to be some catalyst to create the underlying tension for the final saga, which is what is going to happen? What's the big problem that we all need to avoid that the world government, the Celestial Dragons, are trying to set up? What is at stake here? The world needs to generally be awakened to the fact that they are being oppressed by this evil government, this tyrannical, oppressive, authoritarian force, and that this force is ultimately going to wipe them all out, which spurs the impetus for a war of rebellion against this great foe. And then, of course, for the reader, we need to understand what is at stake, obviously, and Vegapunk has set this up perfectly for us. So that was the true purpose of Vegapunk in terms of the broader lore of the story. Now, with Robin stuff, it's going to be the actual details. What's the nitty-gritty? What are the secret truths behind this whole thing? And likely, what is the One Piece? Likely, all of that will be discovered by Robin at Laugh Tale. So I think that Vegapunk and Robin's roles mesh together very, very well. Vegapunk was the wake-up call to the world, spur the action of the story, and a wake-up call to the reader, understand the stakes and the tension. Then Robin is the answers. What is the thing that we're actually fighting for? How do we solve all this? What is the One Piece? What was Joy Boy really trying to leave behind? Perfect two halves to the lore reveal. And we might get some juicy middle in Elbaf as well along the way. Now, people have also noticed that the chapter frequency has been a lot slower lately, and I do have a small theory as to why that is. I guess this is a outside the story sort of theory. It might be completely wrong. It might just be possible that Oda genuinely does need more health breaks nowadays, and we should get used to that. But I do think it's possible that at this point in the story, it's a very, very critical point in the story. Oda has talked about in interviews in the past that he himself sometimes forgets details from long back in the story of One Piece, so he can actually sometimes even rely on fan submissions when readers ask him certain questions to trigger his memory about the long, long history of One Piece. So he's mentioned before that, it's almost as though me and the reader are writing One Piece together. Obviously, Oda kind of plays it up a little bit in interviews. I'm sure that he has a really good handle on the entire, lore of One Piece, but we've even seen some photos of his workshop, and we can see that he does have lots of notebooks that he likely has to peruse and browse through to find all the details of what he's trying to write. I imagine that this segment of the story that we're getting, and I do think that it will go down in the One Piece community as Vegapunk's speech being this milestone, huge moment that really changed everything. I do think that this moment in the story is something that he's been building towards for a very long time, and it's a section of the story that he felt like he absolutely could not fuck up, because it was just integral to setting the stage for pretty much everything that happens down the line, and the manner in which he gives the reveals to the readers and to the rest of the characters in the world has to be very, very specifically parsed and thought out by Oda. I think every single word has to be carefully thought out so as to reveal just enough to get the effect that he's wanting, to feed the reader the precise amount of information that he's trying to get out, without revealing too much about the truth of the world and everything that he actually wants to hide for later down the line. So I feel as though because this is such a monumental, world-changing event, this is the Egghead incident that was hyped up many chapters ago, because it's such an important information-based reveal in the story, I would not be surprised if Oda is having to take extra time to really carefully go through his notes and just make sure that he's writing these chapters exactly how he needs to write them so that nothing is messed up. I also wouldn't be surprised if, as we cut back to more traditional action, just Luffy fighting the Gorosei or Zoro fighting Lucci again or something like that, if we shift back more to a regular weekly schedule, but it's just this section of the story that Oda needs to be extra careful with. At least that's maybe what I like to believe. So hopefully we get back to a regular release schedule somewhat soon as we move past Vegapunk's speech, because it does feel as though just in general, time is kind of stopped as we're just listening to this speech play out. Almost all the background stuff, I know people are clamoring for more action of Luffy versus Warcury, things like that, but it's all just background noise at this point. The main event is Vegapunk's speech, and we should really treasure this moment in the story because this is going to go down as a watershed moment where just the vast majority of everything that matters so far has been revealed, and we're just left with one or two major pieces left. Like, this is lore piece, right? This is what we've been waiting for so long. So I personally have loved this entire section of Vegapunk's speech. I think it is going to be seared into my memory as one of the most iconic sections of the entire story of One Piece. So that aside, I feel like the three major developments from this chapter were: 1, the reveal that the Iron Giant is guarding the Den Mushi; 2, the confirmation that Joy Boy is the one that really wanted to pass down the ancient weapons down to the future generations; and 3, that Vegapunk was not aware what the Mother Flame was used for, and he is very apologetic for it. So to begin with, the Iron Giant guarding the Den Mushi, a lot of people speculated that the broadcast snail would actually be inside the Ancient Giant. So very close, it's practically correct. It does set up basically the idea that some of the Gorosei are going to have to try and take on the Ancient Giant, and I'm very interested to see how that plays out, because a lot of people speculate that the Iron Giant was one of the members of Joy Boy's crew, and if this is the case, we're going to get some insight into potentially just how strong Joy Boy's crew was back in the day. So I'm excited to see that battle. Then second, the reveal that Joy Boy really did intend to pass the ancient weapons down to future generations to be used. Well, I've talked about in this previous video on exactly how One Piece is going to end. It's very clear that Poseidon's role is going to be to guide the Sea Kings to make sure that they can take Noah around the world to save people as the flooding increases. So I think that the role of Poseidon is very clear. It's an ancient weapon not designed to destroy, but designed to protect and to save. I think similarly in the past I've speculated that Pluton would be used for the destruction of the Red Line, which could help open up the ocean even more, as past theories that go way back, even before me, all the way back to 2013, seem to suggest that the destruction of the Red Line is crucial to creating the dawn of the world in certain ways. So the big question I personally have left is basically Uranus. How would Uranus be used to help save the world down the line? Why would Joy Boy want Uranus to be passed down? Maybe Uranus was intended to be used to be fought against the Celestial Dragons, but it just fell into Imu's hands. It's hard to say, or maybe there's some other purpose to Uranus that we still have yet to fully understand. So Uranus is the big question mark there for me. And then finally, I think we got a really good display of Vegapunk's character here, with him realizing that his weapon was misused for destruction, and he gets this big apology moment where he bows and apologizes, I suppose, for his hubris in some ways. He begins this whole speech talking about how he was Icarus, he flew too close to the sun. And a lot of the arc begins with even Bonnie calling out Vegapunk for being too ambitious in his scientific progress and not really thinking about the potential consequences, right? So Vegapunk himself seems to be somewhat aware of that, but at the same time, the themes of the story go, when have we seen this before? We saw this with Frankie basically having created certain battleships all the way back in his flashback, and then the battleships were misused by outside entities. Funnily enough, the world government as well stole his battleships and misused them, and at the end of the day, Frankie was taught that he should not be embarrassed or ashamed of his creation. I hope that that messaging can be worked back into this arc in some way, especially with so many of us hoping that Frankie plays some sort of a prominent role in this arc. But we're seeing it now again on a very broad scale, the same concept, the same theme established all the way back in Water 7, which ironically was an arc that first really focused on the ancient weapons, particularly Pluton. And we're seeing those same ideas brought back today, just on, a global level of impact. So seeing Vegapunk also affected by this same idea that even the world's smartest scientist, even his creation, can be misused for things that he never imagined, but he's taking responsibility for his creations and the destruction that they have caused, and he still believes that they can be used for good. because ultimately creating something on its own is not inherently good or evil, it's how it's used. And Vegapunk still seems to believe that the Mother Flame and the idea of an infinite energy source in general can bring peace and harmony to the world and potentially help bring it into the dawn. So I really like how those themes are being played up again in this arc Egghead Island. As many have noted, Egghead Island does seem to follow up on a lot of the ideas of Enies Lobby, down to the idea of O'Hara unveiling the truth, studying history, and all of that. So I do think the events of this chapter were really interesting. And lastly, I was very interested about Akainu's reaction to all this, because Akainu, as I speculated earlier, well, as soon as the Marines find out that the Celestial Dragons are trying to murder literally everybody on the planet, it wouldn't really make sense for most of the Marines, and particularly Akainu, to keep obeying. But one of my patrons, Meek, had a great point on why this might be the case. So I'm going to look at the voice of the people, submissions from my top tier of patrons. Meek says, the real wonder I have from this chapter is about Akainu. The wording from the translations and Japanese are vague, and it's hard to tell whether he's angry that Vegapunk is talking about this info, or if he wants Vegapunk to tell even more about this hidden info and is upset at the world government instead. So in this case, I think we're just going to have to wait for the official translations, or if there's some really Japanese savvy people who want to explain in the comments for the rest of us what they are interpreting Akainu's tone to be here, that would be great. It does seem like Akainu knew more about the history of the world and possibly the future intentions of the Celestial Dragon to further sink the world based on his comments. And an interesting little note is that Sengoku, based on the fact that he's, scarfing down snacks and trying not to talk, he also seems to know a lot as well, so I wouldn't be surprised if when you become Fleet Admiral of the Marines, you become privy to certain information as to the truth of the world. But Akainu's reaction is strange and interesting, because I could not possibly understand why a Fleet Admiral, why Akainu would want to protect the idea that the Celestial Dragons are going to kill everybody on the planet. That just does not seem to make sense for any Marine, period. We can already see the other lower level Marines panicking at all this and really getting upset, so why is it that Akainu arguably seems to be angry at Vegapunk for revealing this, when if he's aware of all this, that the Celestial Dragons are going to kill all the innocent citizens of the world, and Akainu's already been butting heads with the Gorse and the Celestial Dragons, why is Akainu on board with this? Why does he want to protect this? So I think that is kind of strange, unless I'm misinterpreting Akainu's words right here. And on the flip side, according to Meek's translations, it sounds as though Akainu may be angry at the world government instead, and is wanting Vegapunk to reveal more, which I personally think would make a lot more sense, but at the end of the day, however Oda wants to write Akainu is how he wants to write Akainu. I'm personally going to continue to hope that things make sense and stay in character, and that Akainu wouldn't just want the mass genocide of the entire planet for no real reason other than to serve the Celestial Dragons, which is something that he's never seemed to be interested in doing. So that's all for this chapter. I've been loving this speech so far, and I will talk to you all next week.